Heroes of Reality podcast, a podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
What up, young adventurers? Dylan here, and I am here with Rick Leander. He is a global executive with a track record of building businesses, innovating products, and transforming the way businesses are run. He leverages his financial acumen and an entrepreneurial spirit and combines them with behavioral science to help companies enhance their go-to-market strategy with specific focus on improving connections with members, customers, and employees. RC, or Rick, thrives on working with smart people doing interesting work, leading or being part of a group that is passionate about the work they are doing, focusing ethically on improving the financial well-being of others. He is equally enthusiastic about solving tough business strategies and client experiences issues while helping to drive technology change. So without any delay, I'd like to welcome Rick. Hey, buddy, how goes it?
It's great, Dylan. How are you doing tonight?
I'm excited, man. I'm excited to have you on, dude. It's been a little while since I talked to you, and I'm just really excited to chat and learn about your journey, all in the transformative space, brother.
Terrific. Let's dive in.
Cool, man. So at first, could you please let people know a little bit about your background in transformation? I know you have a big hand in that, and I'd love to learn a little bit about the journey. And I think you currently hold a position in transformative space as well.
Yeah. So quickly, my background is more than 3 decades with global financial institutions. Spent a big chunk of my career in New York, London, and Tokyo. Was the CEO of a fintech before fintech became a thing. Global strategy officer for a large payments company, and at some point in that journey, you feel like, at least I did, like I'd sold my soul to the devil. And so I have spent most of the last 15 years trying to buy my soul back, mostly by working with really interesting mission-driven companies, sort of at the intersection of behavioral economics and transformative technologies.
That's really interesting. And yeah, I've seen that's kind of like ships crossing the night. One of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people in the I want to make money space go, I want to go in the help people space. And then some people, like in the nonprofit world or the help people space, that can't survive for a long time, like, you know what, I just need to make some money. And so they kind of cross some things. And I think the Holy Grail is really trying to get those two pieces together, which is how do we make money, be healthy, and thrive, as well as helping other people at the same time. And it sounds a bit of what you kind of do, bringing a bit of that global fintech strategy to these companies. How do you, knowing that that's kind of the goals and some of the challenges that people face, what are the typical roadblocks that you usually help these companies unstuck themselves or get out of these situations to actually become a profitable, conscious company?
Well, I think one of the things that's happened with entrepreneurs today, particularly mission-driven entrepreneurs, is they're kind of already headed in that space, right? The real problem is trying to convince people that are trying to automate some process so you can put 30,000 people out of work that there's probably a different way to use that technology. And it's one of the reasons that the transformative tech space is so cool, right? I mean, the whole goal of this transformative tech ecosystem is to create technology that helps with human well-being and flourishing. And the ecosystem really has as one of its premises that you can do that and be profitable, that you can make money while helping to move society forward. And that's really kind of the areas that we're focusing on today.
Do you have a process? Because you talk about global strategy, and strategy is one of those, like the word design, it's very amorphous. It's very kind of hard to pin down. So like, how do you define strategy? And then like, how do you help companies with the strategy process?
Yeah, it's interesting. I belong to a strategy group that meets every Thursday. Half of them are from Europe and the other half are from the US. And we spend lots of time debating exactly what strategy is. And I'm not sure that the group's ever actually morphed around a single idea. But for me, the idea of a strategy is focusing on what's the long-term goal and objective for the organization and using that as kind of your North Star for everything else that you do. And that really helps. And of course, particularly when we're talking about mission-driven companies, we almost always start with, so what's the mission, right? What are you trying to do? What constituencies are you trying to serve? Are there specific problems you're trying to solve or specific opportunities you think exist in the marketplace? And then let that then drive into a series of executional strategies and tactics. And one of the, in terms of process, a lot of the process depends on the culture of the organization and the way they're used to thinking about choices and making decisions and analyzing options. But one of the things that we do almost all the time in this process is talk about the need for, what we call a cheerful curmudgeon, or a devil's advocate, right? Somebody who's actually prepared to sit around the table and ask the questions that either nobody asked or nobody ever wanted to have asked. It's this notion of really making sure that you've chewed hard on the assumptions, that you've really analyzed all the options, that you've thought hard about what could work and what couldn't work. When we speak about sort of the process for this, one of the things I love to do is talk to founders and strategy teams around, all right, so what are the things that could cause this from working? And what's interesting is in a lot of these conversations, you go, oh no, this is gold. This is going to work. There's nothing that could screw this up. And when that happens, I say, well, then our work's not done, right? You guys need to go away hard and think hard about what are the ways this could go badly. Because once we've identified sort of what could go wrong with the strategy, what assumptions could be flawed, then you can begin to build a process around, all right, so what do we do if that happens? Because invariably that is what happens, right? And so this notion of really testing hard, really asking tough questions, and trying to find a way to validate the assumptions and test all the assumptions are a critical part of the process for me.
I've never heard the term cheerful curmudgeon, but I absolutely know that type of person, and it's very the antithesis of who I am, because I have a CFO on my company, and we're always being the CEO. I'm always go, but here's what's going to happen. We're going to get these things. I've got a plan. I've got this. And then she looks backwards. She's like, yeah, but our history is this. This is what we've done. This is, I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand where we're going. And so and she's a very cheerful, wonderful person. But as soon as you hear it, I appreciate it, but it does make me want to rip out the hair I don't have, having to have those conversations back. It's super critical and needed, and it's challenging. But it's like, how do you keep in that pocket of being both cheerful and then also ruthlessly critical to the vision, right? Like, it's very hard because it's versus just absolutely just being fearful, because there's a difference between being fearful and being critical. And it's a very nuanced conversation that you have to walk that line. So what are some telltale signs that someone's actually doing what they're doing, or they've gone too far, or they're not going far enough, being in that position of being a cheerful curmudgeon?
I think one of the ways that you often see this executed from people who haven't gone through the exercise before is it's a little bit like the Monty Python skit, where it's just whatever, if everybody says yes, you say no automatically, right? And what you're really trying to do is drive a conversation. You're really trying to challenge assumptions, challenge beliefs in some case, challenge the research that you've done. And a lot of it, the way I like to do it, the way I like seeing people do it, is through the process of asking really good questions, right? I mean, I've been a chief strategy officer several times in my career, and I've always told CEOs that I dealt with that if they were hiring me as a chief strategy officer because they wanted somebody who knew all the answers, they were hiring the wrong guy. That really, I think really good chief strategy officers are the ones that know what questions need to get asked. And then if they're really fortunate, they're surrounded with really, really smart people who go away and get those answers. And so that process really needs to be sort of asking thoughtful questions that get to the heart of the issues, and not just the automatic gainsaying of whatever the position is on the other side of the table. That's clearly an indication you've gone too far. And I think at every point when you've gotten the questions asked and answered, even if you didn't like the answers, at some point the team either needs to step up and say, yeah, I'm not sure I agree with all of this, but as an organization, we need to move forward. Or they need to say, I don't agree with this, and it's time for me to move on. Because once you finally reach the point where a decision's final, the team really needs to put out a unified front to the organization.
Got it. Yeah, and that's hard, and that's a challenge. And I imagine there's a lot of conflict with the CEO of the company and chief strategist. I have a hard time sometimes differentiating between those two positions because I feel like the CEO a lot is about to be the visionary and strategy and thinking that along. And sometimes if you have that, it's almost like two heads of a snake trying to work together if they have different strategies. But what you're saying is that for the perspective shift that I'm getting from you, it's more about chief strategy officer is more about asking questions than trying to instead of trying to say, oh, I know the strategy, I'm going to shove it down your throat. It's more about a questioning, insightful, reflective process to get people to expand what's possible versus trying to drive agenda. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. I mean, the organizations where I've been chief strategy officer, where it worked because I was a real partner with the CEO, almost an alter ego, right? So the CEO's version, in those cases, the CEO's version of a strategy question was, sending me an email at 2:00 in the morning saying, I just had this most interesting thought. What if we did X? And my job as the chief strategy officer was to go ask and get answered the 20, 30, 40, 50 questions that needed to get asked and answered before we went and did X.
Oh.
So it's really important that you have a really good relationship. And not every CEO wants a chief strategy officer. Twice I have moved on because the CEO got replaced and the new CEO said, I really think I should be my own chief strategy officer. So it's very much it's a style, it's a personality. You got to be in sync with the person you're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's actually a really powerful point. And one of the things I realize also, sometimes some of the CEOs of companies, they throw out half-baked ideas, right? And they don't put in the time to flush out a concept. So if you're talking about saying, oh, well, I think we should do this, and then you ask the 57 questions around the thing, that makes it reveal the shroud that is hiding the idea. That makes a ton of sense to me, because then the CEO can't get with these. From what I've seen some CEOs do in the spaces, they have like a half-cocked idea and they throw it into the crowd, and then they get mad at everybody for not executing the half-baked idea because there wasn't a clarity and concept and really a care that went into crafting that idea or a strategy behind that idea to send that out. So that really resonates with me, is really helping CEOs flushing out their sometimes half-baked ideas that they don't realize are half-baked because they're emotionally involved with the core concept versus actually exploring what the concept could be, and instead of infatuated with it, going to actually marry the concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in my experience, you also see the other side of this, which is you've got a CEO who thought they were just talking out loud and then woke up a month later to find out that everybody had gone and chased some idea that had surfaced at a board meeting, and the CEO goes, wait a minute, I was just bouncing ideas off you guys. I didn't expect you to go out and buy X or do whatever. So both of those things happen, and that's again where a CSO can really help the organization make sure that there's a process to go through before you chase down one of these. I'm a huge fan of a concept that I first heard from Paul Sappho at Institute for the Future years ago. This notion of strong opinions weakly held. And there are some people that this drives crazy, but I've always liked it because his notion was you should always feel comfortable making an opinion based on incomplete information, because let's face it, it's always incomplete information. But then you need to be intellectually honest and go away and actively find things that would change that opinion you've created. And if you do that, you can stay out of trouble a lot of times.
One thing I really, really like about that concept is that a lot of times there is a fear around the judgment of other people, of how much you accept an adopt idea, and then how much you're willing to let go of an identity or a concept around a thing that allows you, because a lot of times people step in space and they're too afraid to lean in all the way and go one way or the other. And so they're kind of in this like emotional pull and tug where they're kind of pulling their punches, if you would, going through a process versus saying, okay, we're all into this. Okay, that's not working. We're not all into that. We're going the other direction. And you go back and forth with that. But if you do that, you make so much more progress if you're willing to completely adopt an identity around a company or a mission or a brand or whatever they might be, and then completely let it go and jump in. It seems like you make so much more progress that way versus not willing to let yourself fall in love with something else or explore something else or let yourself be something different. Just take lessons from Madonna, if you would, her ability to reinvent herself again and again and again for decades. So that's a beautiful thing. How are you? What are some key signs, or what I'd call threshold guardians, that maybe like CEOs or chief strategists are not adopting that, and they might be too firmly entrenched around a core concept or an identity? Like how do you gain awareness that you maybe aren't holding strong opinions weakly held?
There are probably all kinds of indicators about that, right? I mean, one of my friends, Chunka Moy, wrote a really interesting book called $1 Billion Lessons, where he talks about these massive failures that supposedly were made, or that were made by supposedly really smart people, right? The smartest people in the room consistently make really bad decisions. And a lot of it has to do with the culture, the attitude at the top, and how decisions get made as a group, right? There's all kinds of behavioral economics things that we talk about that deal with how groups make decisions and how they tend to get into trouble. The other, one sort of personal pet peeve for me, and I think anybody who's ever worked for a large company has at one point had a boss, and I've had several over my career, who, when you first meet them and you're trying to iron out what your, operating principles are going to be with them, how many times have you had a boss say, and I don't like any surprises, right? I don't want any surprises. When I was running when I was in the strategic technology group at a major bank, my team was challenged to surprise me every single week, right? I wanted to learn something new, and I wanted them to be learning something new. And it's just amazing how so much of the models, the leadership models, stress this notion that there shouldn't be any surprises. And I understand what they're trying to get to, but a message that broad and not very nuanced, I think, leads to a situation where, as you move up the ladder, people increasingly aren't prepared to look somebody in the eye and say, that's just not right. You're just not paying attention. So the first thing these guys ought to do, the guys and gals, the first thing leaders at the top ought to do is embrace this notion that there are tons of things they don't know. There's tons of things their marketing team and their research team and their product development team don't know. And that they ought to go out every day and try and find something new that surprises them that they didn't know before.
That's so awesome. And you're right. There's a thing that happens that I've noticed is like a flip. So when you're a small, tiny, smart, just doing it there, you will do massive growth because everything's a risk and you go it. But as you scale as a company, you kind of flip that model where now you have something to lose. And so nobody wants to be the person that causes the big loss to happen. And you see this a lot in government institutions where everyone's just like, okay, as long as I don't step out of line, I'm safe. And so everybody does it. The safety becomes the number one priority versus growth. And when they choose that, there's a stagnation, there's no innovation, there's no creation. And because of that, they're never able to kind of reinvent themselves. And then the market kind of surpasses them as a path. I love the idea and around the letting the team know there's no surprises, or not no surprises, that you want to be surprised every day. And that's kind of creating that thing. Is that around, you're talking about behavioral economics. Can you expand a little bit more about what the behavioral economics is and how it relates to this concept?
Sure. So if you think back to the classic economics that we all got exposed to in school,
Hmm.
it starts with the premise that humans are rational, right? That our preferences are stable, that we understand risks and know how to do risk analysis well, that we're able to prioritize short term versus long term. You know, behavioral economics suggests that that's a myth, right? That our preferences aren't stable, that we don't make good decisions, that we're incredibly short-term focused, that we like immediate gratification. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Richard Thaler refers to this notion of supposedly irrelevant factors, SIFs. All these things that classic economics say shouldn't impact the way you make decisions, but in fact really do. So while classic economics would suggest that we're all Mr. Spock from Star Trek, behavior economics suggests we're all Homer Simpson. And so, you know, what we do in behavioral science, behavioral economics, is recognize what those things are and then try and put them to use in a way that steers people toward behavior that's good for them.
Mm.
Now, you can also use this stuff for evil, right? You can, and we see this all the time, where when you want to unsubscribe from something, for an example, the amount of friction that gets put into that process so that surprising amounts of people just give up and never unsubscribe and continue to pay the $25 a year is staggering. And so behavior economics, like almost everything else, can be used for good or for bad. But that's what we try and do. What we do in behavioral economics is try and educate people on how consumers really analyze choices and make decisions, and then use that knowledge so that you can steer people to better behaviors.
Got it. I mean, it's recognizing that we're not um, thinking machines that feel; we're feeling machines that think, and that we make that heartfelt decision, and then we use our brain to kind of justify the whole process of like, oh, that's that because it's a savings. That's why I did it, or insert whatever reason that makes sense. When you are analyzing whether it's a customer or an actual employee or anybody in the space, do you have a process for identifying the behaviors of the consumer or of employee to really kind of get that? Because there's a thing that happens that I've noticed where like you don't get the entire truth from people. They're not completely forthright for whatever reason, whether they're consumers or whether they're employees. They're kind of like, okay, what can I tell you to make this conversation go away as fast as possible? So how do you mitigate against that, and how do you get people to be fully authentic and share their dark underbelly of actions to be fully transparent so that you can understand and actually build around that or with that?
Yeah, I think pollsters in the last two national elections have shown that people don't often tell you, or often don't tell you, what's really going on and what's driving them. One of the things we know in behavior economics is that in general, surveys are a terrible way to find out what people are really doing. If you want to find out what people are really doing, you go and watch their behavior. Because you're right, people will rationalize all kinds of things and give you the reasons why they did it. And oftentimes it's either because they want the conversation in quickly, or because they are at some level embarrassed by the difference between the way they think they should have behaved and the way they actually did behave, and so they provide cover for it. So there's a Japanese term which escapes me at the moment, but it was developed in Japan, and the idea was that if you wanted to know what was going on the factory floor, you didn't look at numbers, you didn't look at surveys, you actually wandered down to the factory floor and you watched people in action. And so particularly when we're dealing with early stage companies and they're trying to think about market research and market fit, and we say surveys is one way to get the data, and it will probably be worth about as much as you are paying people to play, right? If you're asking for free surveys on SurveyMonkey online, don't count on the results being particularly useful. And certainly don't count on them when you say, here's a great product, how much would you pay for it? Because everybody will buy everything in that kind of scenario. What we tell people is they need to go away and observe. They need to go away, and this isn't new news. If you think about, for instance, the way Procter and Gamble develops a lot of their laundry products, for instance, they take product managers and their teams and they stick them in people's houses and they watch how people do laundry. How do they interact with the machines? How do they pour the liquid or pull the pods out or do whatever? Because they know that surveys are an incredibly poor substitute for seeing what people actually do.
It makes a ton of sense. I mean, you're cutting out all of the interpretation, all of the narrative stories, all of that stuff, because you are watching direct actions and it's not being filtered through what they're saying. You get to go out and see it and do it, which is true. It's just one of those things. It's like the same thing. Like, how do I get fit? Diet and exercise. There you go. 2 words. Have a great day. Take care. Off your bye. But so many people won't go through that actual process. They'll try all of these other easier, less friction thingies, take a pill, do a thing to try to get that tangible result where we know how to get that. It's just the effortful intention of taking the time to watch people to break that stuff down is a challenge to have people execute. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, there are a couple of things to break down in that conversation, Dylan. One is, you're right. What we know both in healthcare and in financial services, so it probably applies everywhere, is education is almost worthless. It's an important first step on a marathon journey. And the reason I know that is because you can survey every American in this country, and north of 95% of them know that they need to be more healthy by eating less and exercising more. And yet the obesity levels in this country are through the roof. So knowing ain't doing, as we're fond of saying, right? So knowledge alone is an important first step. But talk about the first step in just a long journey. And so a lot of the financial institutions that we deal with are really focused on financial literacy. Oh, my members aren't saving well, or my customers are spending too much money. I should educate them. Yeah, educate them to begin with, but then where are the tools and the reminders and the assistance that you're going to provide as they try and put that knowledge to use, because it just, knowledge alone doesn't work. The other thing too that you hit on is this notion of, and Kahneman refers to this as the hot state, cold state kind of dilemma. One of the reasons surveys are so awful is because we tend to survey people when they're not in the emotional state that we're trying to test, right? So you sit down with somebody online or in their home and you survey them about how they like to buy a car, and you get a bunch of answers. Well, the problem is when you're surveying them at home, they're not in a car buying mode. They're not in that environment. If you surveyed them while they were in the car dealership debating with a salesperson, the chances are pretty good you'd get a very different range of answers, right? And if you think about it, this hot state, cold state thing works in all kinds of places. It's why nutritionists tell you never to go grocery shopping when you're hungry. Because when you're in a cold state, you go, I'm going to just buy the vegetables and, the low fat stuff and low calories, and I'm going to be really, really careful. And then you wander into the grocery store when you're in a hot state and you buy a bunch of donuts, and your justification isn't, oh, well, I was in a hot state and I was hungry. It was, oh, I spent an extra hour at the gym last week, and so I've kind of earned the right to eat those donuts. So, when we're in a hot state, we won't predict what we're terrible at rationalizing what we've done. And when we're in a cold state, we don't do a good job at all of predicting how we might act when we're in a hot state. So watching what people do and trying to interview them when they're in the state in which you're trying to, when they be engaging in your activity or playing with your application or messing with your product, you still won't get perfect results, but you're likely to get a better set of data.
100%. That makes so much sense, and you're absolutely right. And then so what you're looking for is it's kind of like a double pull trigger where you're like, okay, I'm gonna wait until this person is in the right state, and then I'm gonna look at their habits, or I'm gonna ask a question, or whatever it might be. But if they're not in the right state, if they're if it's midnight and I'm asking them to I don't know, review the sunrise, just that's way off, bad analogy. But for example, that out of a different state, it doesn't quite make sense. So I love that concept. And so then you roll that, and then you can get real data and real facts, and then you can kind of build things from there. In terms of behavioral economics, I know you went from the fintech world before it was syntech, and you're now in the transformative spaces. What transformative technologies or what areas are you specifically interested in, and what companies and that type of, you don't have to name specific names, but what general types of technologies really excite you about helping people and using this behavioral economics and applying it in a way that actually has a transformative effect?
Yeah. Well, in transformative tech, a lot of the effort has been around this notion of physical health and well-being, but also mental health and mental well-being. And there are also tracks of work that we do around the future of cities and the future of transportation and actually the future of work. Because one of the really scary things is there's been some research that within the next 10 years, between automation and artificial intelligence, a significant percentage of jobs that exist today are going to disappear. And a big chunk of those, much to a lot of people's surprise, are knowledge worker jobs, right? A bunch of the basic programming jobs are going to go away because we're teaching machines to program. And so knowledge workers are not safe and secure from this process. So the stuff that interests me heavily these days is the stuff particularly around mental health and mental well-being. We've seen a lot of impact this past 18 months because of the shutdown. But even before the shutdown, what we realized was that a lot of things that were going on in the technology world that were supposed to help were actually making things worse. So even before the pandemic, what you found was that the interaction that people had with our so-called social media tools continued to grow, and yet the feeling of isolation, the people who reported feeling isolated and friendless and depressed, those numbers were growing and growing and growing long before the pandemic sort of locked everybody up. One of the things I'm fond of saying, although I have to admit our founder is not quite so fond of me saying this, is one of the things about transformative technology, one of the things we're working on is to use technology to fix the problems that technology has created or at least made worse. So an easy example of things that are going on in this space are tools to help with meditation, right? Most people, in fact, a significant chunk of people who have tried meditation for any kind of regular time report that it helps on a whole variety of fronts. It helps with stress, it helps with anxiety, it helps with depression. And yet we've really struggled to make meditation accessible to a wide swath of the population. People don't know how to get started. And so one of the things that I think the transformative tech ecosystem has really helped the last 4 or 5 years is a series of both software and hardware programs that help people get acclimated to the ecosystem around meditation. So some of them are just simple apps that you can download on your smart device, but others are devices that you wear that provide biofeedback to really help you understand what state of meditation you're in and provide cues to help you go deeper and deeper. And so I'm really, really proud of the work that the ecosystem has done in that field, particularly given what we've all just been through these last 20 months.
See, that's super interesting. And you're looking at it in what I would call kind of like gamifying your life, right? You're putting gamification metrics, which means these unseen things where people are meditating, but it's not being tracked, it's not being accounted for, or you have all of these unseen metrics that we perceive with people. Like you can somewhat tell, like if you see me and I just got back from Starbucks and I had a Trenta coffee and I'm all jacked up on mine, I'm all shaky and we're having a conversation, you're like, you got a lot of energy. There's something going on with you that's a bit intense. I mean, but if you were to look at my heart rate and my, HRV and all the biofeedback, there would be clear indicators what's going on. So being able to pull these biofeedback elements out and actually expose them to people, it creates that first state of what meditation is supposed to do, which is awareness, right? You become aware and then you can regulate. And that's part of that being focused on the breathe. And I can tell when I'm all out of whack, when my meditation, when all of a sudden my brain keeps going to a certain subject. I'm clearly worried about something or something's going on, and I'm trying to focus on my breath, and my monkey mind's like, no, you got this thing. You're gonna end up in the forest by yourself alone, and you're gonna die, or something's gonna happen, some sort of weird primal instinct. And so I love the concept of kind of gamifying your life by using these unseen markers and making them into like gamified tactics. And so is there any particular one of these technologies that stand out to you that have really created kind of a gamification style, or things that you're really excited for that might be on the forefront? I think the one that I think is almost too crazy, we don't need to dive super deep, is Elon Musk actually tapping into the brain by drilling a hole in the head and then hooking it up to an app. I'm not quite there yet. I'm close. I'm not quite there yet. But is there any other ones that like stand out to you that really specifically excite you?
Well, the one that I've latched onto is a device called Muse. They have a couple of different versions, one of which you can sleep in. So along with basic meditation techniques, it also helps. It's got some routines that'll play to help you fall into a good sleep set earlier. They run competitions. The app keeps track of how many hours a day or how many minutes a day you've meditated and what state you were in, whether you were calm or neutral or active. It gives you a wide variety of options. You can share the information with your friends. So it was my first exposure to the hardware side of the meditation piece, and it continues to be my favorite.
That's awesome. I had the Muse headband. It's somewhere. I moved. I don't know where it is. It's definitely somewhere. I know that for sure. One of the things I thought was interesting about it is when you start to meditate really good, the birds pop in and they chirp, and then I recognize that the birds chirp, and then I lose the birds. And that pattern of going, oh, I'm doing good, and it just knocks me right out of the whole point of it. And it's really funny because you're talking about meditation competitions, which is the exact opposite of what meditations are for. But at the same time, I got excited of like, I can meditate harder than you. Look at me go, which is a really funny concept. But I mean, in some ways you need that because there's that gamified habit that gets you to kind of roll through it, that more than anything, you just want to create that urge and that desire to make it something that you want to do, kind of like a training wheels on the side of the truck, and the training wheels is getting you going, and it's not necessarily intended for training wheels, and then you pull them off and you're like, look, I can meditate. So which is really fun. Along the way, with these transformative technologies, and so it seems like you do a lot of things around coaching and guiding and advice and mentoring all of these transformative technology companies. What are typical threshold guardians or roadblocks have you seen companies make as they're getting into this space? What are some typical stumbling blocks that they may come across?
What I think is interesting is, at least for the companies that I play with, most of them don't realize they're in the transformative technology space until I tell them.
Oh.
So yeah. So they have this passion. They're working really hard to get it done. They're not getting the kind of traction that they think their great idea should get from the capital providers. And somehow I get introduced to them. I hear a presentation or a friend introduces me, and I listen to like 10 seconds of their pitch, and I go, oh, you're a transformative tech company. Let me share that world with you. And so there's, to a large degree, there's massive relief that there's actually other people worrying about this, and there are other people who are thinking about it. So it's kind of, they often find themselves really pleased that they're members of a club they didn't know existed, right? And that there's help that come with that. But then I think what happens is they go, oh, so you guys have access to all the capital that will get this immediately. And the answer is no. You're still going to have to run through the traps, right? You're still going to have to play the game. We're going to be able to put you in contact with people who are more attuned to this space. That may be a good thing and it may be a bad thing. because you may end up dealing with people who know a lot more. You have been dealing with people who knew a lot less than you. Now you're going to deal with people who know a lot more than you do. And so be prepared for the fact that, the bar may be raised on some of the conversations that you're trying to have.
That's super interesting. And I've seen that a lot. I've also seen that a lot in the virtual reality space, because I do a lot in virtual reality, where people get this wonderful, amazing idea. And then they immediately go, someone's going to steal my idea. Someone's going to take my idea. I don't want to look. So I'm just going to heads down. I'm going to knock this thing out. And they go into a cave, right? And they don't realize that there's a whole city being built around this cave, and they don't get it. And then eventually when they pop out there, they're like, look, I've made this one building. And then they see that there's skyscrapers all around them. They're like, oh, shoot. And it's like, but if they would have gone to the big city in the beginning, they would have been a part of the community. They would have seen, oh, I don't necessarily need to build this thing. I could leverage what he's building, and I can take my 2 cents and add to it and build an extra, level on top of that building or something. But I've seen that a lot, where they end up in the cave because of lack of connections or fear or whatever, or just not or fall in love with their idea product. I've seen that so much. I think it's really powerful. But then what you're talking about, that next step, which I want to ask you a question, is the next step is like, oh, there's investors. Oh, please help me. If I only had a whole bunch of money, all of my problems would be solved. I have this idea. It's on the back of the napkin. It's a great idea. Can you give me $1 million? Right. So if there was somebody listening, what would be some indicators that they're ready for investment? What would be some signs to show them that they may or may not be ready to actually seek it? Or what would they need to do to really build safety and confidence for investors inside the space?
Despite some of the folklore that has grown up around a few of the massive tech companies, most people are not going to get funding on an idea. Certainly, the folks that I know that are providing funding of any amounts at all are not going to give you an idea, give you a bunch of money because you've sketched out something on a napkin. I don't know that those days are over. I've learned never to say never and always, because the universe has a way of slapping you around when you do that. But I think the chances of finding funding for an idea on the back of a napkin, particularly in the transformative tech space, are pretty small. What we're going to be looking for is a team that's got the ability to actually execute and some progress. Right? You don't necessarily need a minimum viable product. I mean, we'll get involved in some of the other folks that we know, the angel investors will play in this space. But you got to be further along than just an idea on a napkin. You've got to have a team. You've got to have some roadmap that tells us how you're going to get this thing to market. You're going to have to give us something that talks about what the opportunity is in the marketplace. When I hear a pitch, I'm interested in 3 things. I'm interested in a really good description of what the product or the opportunity is, what your solution is, and why you think your solution is better than the stuff that's already out there. Because there are very few things that are being chased today that haven't been chased by a bunch of people. And so being able to explain why yours is the breakout idea from the mob is going to be really important before you get very far along. And you don't have to do all that stuff on your own. There's all kinds of accelerators and incubators that will take people in for little or no money and teach them a bunch of stuff and get them hooked up with mentors who are really, really smart. And that's the advice that I would give folks is get yourself surrounded with a team first. I'm really fond. Another one of my sort of guiding principles is I am happiest when I'm the stupidest person in the room. And I think most entrepreneurs would be better served if they believed that as well and surrounded themselves with a bunch of really stunningly smart people who can both be supportive and be the good-natured curmudgeon who's going to ask all the tough questions and make sure stuff gets tested.
That's great. And so touching on those points and leading to a question about that is, really it's creating safety and confidence for the investors is like, hey, do you have the team to be able to do it? Do you really, can you paint a picture in my head of exactly what you're doing? where the market's at, and then how you're going to solve problems for that market. Because so many people create a product with no demand for the market, or they create a product where there's already a saturated market where there's so many other things out there. It's just like, well, why different? Doesn't make sense. So which is a challenge. So one of the challenges that much like that curmudgeon gentleman or lady is up for is, as a CEO, is knowing when to hold on to the vision of your idea and say, this is what I'm pushing through, and then when to take feedback from people that are surrounding you that only have your best interest at heart, that maybe don't have the same vision that you have for what you're doing. And so it's hard to say, okay, you need to take feedback to make your thing better, but you need to stay hard on a vision. Otherwise, it kind of gets like you start to lose the where you're trying to go. So it's like, how do you walk that fine line as a young CEO or a young person who's creating a company, and know when do you stay with the vision of what you're doing, and when do you take feedback from the people around you?
Yeah, that's the $1 million, $10 million, $1 billion question, right? If you had a simple 3-point checklist that would answer that question, you and I would both be filthy stinking rich. So I'm gonna bail on the question a little by saying that what you've got to do is you've got to figure out a way with your idea to get some level of comfort around market validation. Right? Because your advisors may be right or wrong. The providers of capital may be right or wrong. You know, it's an old cliche, but you got to figure out some way to see if the dogs are going to eat it. And one of the way, you know, and people, a lot of people go, well, you know, I asked my brother, mother, best friend about X, and they loved it. You know, I showed them the website, or I showed them the app, and I said, you ought to turn that question around. So what you ought to do is you ought to go to these people and say, you know, one of my guys gave me this one, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. What do you think? Right? Don't make this about your idea. Make it about somebody else's idea that you may already have some skepticism on. And if the people you really know and trust say, no, even just, you know, even framing it that way, I think there's a nugget there you ought to chase. I think you can feel a little bit more comfortable. But if you go ask your friends, what do you think of my idea? You might as well just ask yourself, right? You might as well just look in the mirror, because most of us, no matter how tough we think our friends are, at some point are going to go, God, I can't break his heart one more time. Yes, it's great. It's the best thing we've ever seen. So find some way to make it not about you.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I learned that mistake a couple of decades ago when I asked my mom an opinion about a T-shirt that I was making, and then she's like, "Yeah, it'd be great, yeah." And then I made them, and I ended up like with boxes of these T-shirts, and my mom wouldn't even buy one. So I was like, there's a lesson here to be learned, and I have a large wardrobe of the same outfit, so you know it's a win-win there for me. So being in the space and helping these people out and helping them, you know, understand it, you know, is this a viable idea? Is this something that's investable? Is it how to get strategy, how to get clarity, how to actually build this business, and guiding people along this mission. And it seems to me that if I had put you along the hero's journey, you're kind of in the mentor phase where you've gone around the block again, and you're at the path where you're shepherding, you know, people along the path, going, okay, go through the cave. This is where you need to go. What for you, being a mentor on this journey, is your personal holy grail for actually contributing and putting in effort and helping these people along the path? For you, what is there? Is there a specific mission for yourself? Is there a thing you're trying to achieve, or what does that look like for yourself?
If the question is, why do I do this? There are probably 2 or 3 things. One is, as I said, I like being surrounded by really smart, talented, creative people, and most entrepreneurs are, right? They're passionate about what they do, and so the energy of these folks and their passion keeps me energized, and I get really invested in a lot of these organizations and spend a fair amount of time trying to figure out how to help. Right? What are the things that could go wrong, and how do I help them steer? So they need to be smart. They need to
Mhm.
be passionate about what they do. And the real North Star for me, as I've said, is it needs to be mission driven. They need to be doing something that is going to help move society forward in a real way. So, once again, and I'll come back to this, I've quit dealing with most of even with all my years in financial services. I've stopped dealing with most financial tech companies because most of them have as their goal to automate some process so that, banks don't need tellers anymore. And, you know, I don't know if having tellers is a good thing or a bad thing for banks, but I know having those people employed is a good thing for society. And so I just have no interest. I just can't get up in the morning and get excited about those kinds of opportunities. But if somebody's working on something that will help with mental wellness, or a
Mm.
fintech I am dealing with that is trying to use, not trying, they are using behavior economics to significantly increase the savings rates of low and moderate income households, I'm all in for that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's beautiful. With with that, I mean, do you have a personal story of a time that you've helped one of these companies and they had a direct impact on the customer? Maybe a burning heart memory or something that you reflect on where you look back, you're like, that was worth it. And actually you felt the actual impact of helping a company and you could see the impact of who they're helping and you got the reward in that.
Yeah, I think this is going to sound kind of a little circular, but there's an organization here locally.
Uh-huh.
They are a fintech,
Mm.
and they are very focused on savings and financial planning for low and moderate income households. And the founder, who I've gotten to know pretty well, really talented guy, person of color. He's had trouble raising money. Um, One of the things that I've been associated with over the years is a group at Duke called the Common Sense Lab. And every year they take on, at no cost to the participants, 5 or 6 projects that are designed to use behavioral economics to help organizations in the fintech space. And I got him introduced to these folks, lobbied hard for him, and he was accepted. And the headwinds or the tailwinds that this thing has produced for him are phenomenal. He's now raising money all over the place. He's getting recognized in national publications about sort of being one of the real thought leaders in this space. And so, that's a situation where my help was getting him connected with people who could really provide tons of real hardcore experience in an area where he really needed it. And we, when I think back about it, I think a lot of the work that I've done, along with the direct stuff, is the ability to get people connected with others who can, help them fill in some gaps.
See, that's super awesome. I mean, and you never know, like one connection, one right introduction, one person can change your life. And it's very incredible because you don't realize, because sometimes you're just like, oh, that's a person. Yeah, like, oh, that's another person. But you never know. I'm always amazed when I go back and I look at my life and I look at these just passing introductions, or someone said, hey, you should check out this podcast or this thing, and then all of a sudden that person opens up a world to you. It's an incredible experience to do that, because you just one introduction to a person might seem trivial at the time, but that can snowball and then open those doorways that is just infinitely valuable. So I completely resonate with that, and those connections. It always feels great to make those kind of connections, because then you're generating a massive amount of opportunity for the people in your life. With
Yeah,
but
and you've hit on something that I spend a lot of time preaching to my universe of folks,
mm,
which is, um, I hate this myth of the self-made person, right? The folks who are successful are incredibly lucky, right? There's all kinds of things that were outside their control that happened for them to be successful. Somebody introduced them to somebody, or they sat next to somebody on a plane, or maybe it wasn't something that happened to them, but it was something that happened to somebody else that took them out of the picture that enabled an opportunity. So along with this focus of being mission driven, a lot of the conversations I have with people is you need to be giving back, because everything that you've accomplished so far plays heavily because other people supported you, and you need to be part of that system.
100%. That's one of the things I see when solo entrepreneurs are trying to do a thing. You're like, ooh, that's a really, really hard place to be in. If you're trying to do it all and you're like, okay, I have an idea. I'm gonna learn to program, and I'm gonna do this other thing, and I'm also gonna do the market. And it's like, versus if you can really connect and inspire and grow. There's so much power because you have the life experiences of people, and that's our superpower. And one of my beliefs is that our superpower is to use technology to connect through space and time, right? To operate as one collective whole. And it was one of the things that allowed us to kind of dominate through the planet, for good or for ill, and hopefully for more good along the way as we go through this. But you're right, that connections are incredibly valuable with this, and with the mission you're on, with the connecting people and guiding people and being a mentor to people along this path, and really seeing them succeed. What do you think is the dragon that would stop you? Because you say why you're in this, to help people along the way. What do you think is the biggest thing preventing them or preventing you from actually providing the kind of help that you want to provide?
I think to a large degree you've hit it, which is this notion that they need to be everything, right? That the entrepreneurs need to be an expert in everything, and they need to do everything. There's a wonderful local company here in the CEO and the company is beginning to gain some real traction, but they'd have gained traction a couple of years ago if the CEO had quit saying, I need to do everything. I need to know everything. I need to learn everything. He was surrounded by a group of mentors who were prepared to jump in and do everything from market research to operations to helping him set up payroll systems. And nope, he just felt like he needed to have his hands in everything. And I had the conversation with him that I have with just about every entrepreneur that I play with, which is you ought to have two goals. Your goal ought to be really, really smart and still be the dumbest person in the room, because that's a really good place to be. And yeah.
That's beautiful. That is a beautiful statement, by the way. Your goal is you ought to be really, really smart and still be the dumbest person in the room. That is an amazing goal to have. And yeah, being a part of that, I I totally relate. There was a situation where so I do virtual reality hackathons, right? And one of the ones that I did was at MIT Media Labs, and I was
Yeah.
judging and hosting those things, and I was sitting with this other girl, and we were talking back and forth as we're helping some of these people, and she's like, yeah, man. She's like, I don't feel really smart when I'm around these people here. She's like, everyone here is so smart. And she's like, I just graduated from Harvard. And I was like, oh, I'm so dumb. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God. But they really are smart. They also party very, very hard. I don't know if it's the cold or not, but that's an amazing goal to have. And I completely agree with it. And sorry, that one thought hit me so hard. So that's an amazing goal. On that note, I mean, if you could put up like a billboard sign, or if you could have like a message to tell entrepreneurs, like one lesson or one thing, like, would that be the lesson? Or is there anything else that you would put up to say, okay, you're getting started in this world, you're taking your first step in the journey, pay attention to X?
Yeah, yeah. I think I combine a couple things I've already said. One is like I said, be really, really smart and still the dumbest person in the room, and make sure you've got a cheerful curmudgeon sitting around the table. Somebody who's prepared to look you in the eye and in a way that resonates with you. And I say cheery, but depending on the CEO's style and personality, you may need a real son of a bitch to be your curmudgeon, right? You need somebody who can look the head guy in the eye and say, this isn't working, and they need to be able to respect that.
That is so powerful. You're right. Because some people, you need to be able to get through to them. And some people need a whisper, and some people need an anvil hit over their head. And it just depends on what you need. And that's a bit of that curmudgeon looking at them and going, what is it? Is it a pinch of salt, or is it a bowl of salt? And
Right.
I completely get that. I think that's
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful. And I think it's a beautiful lesson. So with that being said, is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you can tell them how to get a hold of you?
Well, one of the things that I got introduced to a few years ago, which is particularly as I've been playing with people in the technology space and in the transformative technology space in particular, is a quote by Paul Virilio, the French philosopher, who said, "When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you invent the plane crash. And when you invent electricity, you invent electrocution." Too often today, we create great technologies with the best purposes in mind and forget that there's a flip side to it. And I want entrepreneurs, I want people who are creating technology to understand that they own both sides of this, and they really need to be conscious of it, because I think a lot of the problems we're seeing today, particularly a lot of the social media space, is we didn't pay attention to the other side of the technology, and now we're trying to dig ourselves out. And I think people who invent this stuff ought to have a moral and ethical obligation to figure out what you're going to do when it crashes.
This conversation, much like the hero's journey, has just come full circle with with the ability to say like that happy curmudgeon and be able to say, okay, great, you have this dream, you have this vision, okay, what if everything goes wrong? What if the ship turns into a shipwreck? What if this happens? And that's important, because then you recognize that it's a cycle, you recognize the journey, and if you plan for those obstacles along the way, you can smell it, because you can smell it coming, because you're going to be in that cold state, and you can recognize when that hot state arrives. And then when you recognize it, it allows you to go, I know this was coming because we've talked about this. I'm at the grocery store. I'm not hungry, and so now I know what I need to do, which I think was a beautifully poetically said. So, Rick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for all the work that you've done in the transformative tech space. And it's been a beautiful time talking with you. Thank you.
Really enjoyed this a lot, Dylan. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, brother. Have a beautiful, blessed day, and I'll see you on the other side, okay?
Sounds good. Take care.
You too. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening. See you on the other side.